believe we're in a moment where we're moving forward in a significant way. Hopefully, there will be some good news coming.
They said, oh, let's have NAFTA before. I said, don't rush it. Take it nice and easy. There's no rush. We get it done right, or we'll terminate.
Okay, it seems like something has shifted, maybe. As we heard from Katie Simpson earlier, NAFTA negotiations have now lurched forward into what could, in fact, be the home stretch. There's some hope for a deal before the three leaders meet at the Summit of the Americas next week. But as we just heard from Trump, there's still no rush, and any deal at this stage would, in fact, be more symbolic than detailed. Here to get into what all of that could potentially mean at issue, Andrew Coyne is in Toronto tonight, Althea Raj is in Ottawa, and Jason Markusoff is joining us from Calgary. Good to see everybody. Andrew, let's start with you. I know you're going to be thrilled with that. What should we make of this? I mean, this has turned fairly quickly, if you believe what we are hearing from behind the scenes, as well as a little bit in front of the cameras, I guess, that we now are in a crunch period to try and get this signed in some sort of agreement in principle. What should we make of that?
Not a hell of a lot in my view. I think I'm pretty skeptical on this. What exactly has changed in substantive terms? Yeah, the Americans withdrew the most egregious of their so-called poison pill demands, the 50% American content, but have they moved on the dispute resolution? Have they moved on procurement? Have they moved on any of these other things? I think that's very unclear. It's very unclear what, if anything, an agreement in principle would mean if these kinds of issues are still hanging over it. And as I say, the last I heard, they had done some housekeeping. They'd reached some agreements on some fairly minor stuff, but the big stuff, they were still a long way away. There's reasons why both sides would want to get to a deal sooner. I think the U.S. administration would like to get a deal before the Mexican elections so they don't have to face what looks like to be a leftist president the next time. And it looks like, and you can see why we would want to have a deal before the U.S. midterm so that we don't have to face what looks like a Democratic Congress. But that's a different matter than actually getting to terms with some of these, very knotty issues that are separating us.
Well, I've been sort of scratching my head about that all day as well, Althea. What is the point in signing something symbolically, in principle, if you still have to do all the work that's going to be required anyway?
I think you're trying to show momentum and show that there are some things on which you have made progress that cannot be unchanged. Right. And so that, I think, would be really the only thing that an agreement in principle, which really doesn't really mean anything. It's not like there would be a final legal text, but maybe there would be an impetus to try to get the rest of the stuff done very quickly. But then it seems like American domestic politics is kind of entering the fray. We saw today Enrique Peña Nieto tweeting about how Mexicans deserve to have respect, and he's willing to go along with a plan to have North American competitiveness, but the relationship is not perhaps as positive as it could be. How do you know with this American president?
Well, no, I completely agree, and I'm not. It is an impossible task I'm asking you all to weigh in on here. But I wonder if, Jason, there are some. We've talked about some of them, the outside influences in terms of accelerating talks, and one of them might be this maybe trade war with China. And I say maybe because none of the tariffs have actually been put in place on either side. So could that be sort of what the president is saying? Okay, well, maybe I need a win in some aspect of this.
I think he's just become addicted to quick wins lately. Look at how decisive he wants to be on the border and the National Guard. Look how decisive he wanted to be on tariffs. So I think this is just, not only is this, expeditious to get, Robert Lighthizer, who's more of a China nut, onto that file and shift off this one. I think it's also just for him to be able to brandish a document and have a proclaimed order. And I think there's some motivation for Trudeau to get into that. Look, as we're going to discuss in the next segment, he's had a couple pretty bad trips without much to show for it. So for him to be able to say, we've got an agreement in principle that at very least we're not going to be losing NAFTA entirely, that could be good for him. But this will be, anything that they come up with next week in Peru with the Summit of the Americas is going to be very, very surface. One of the original NAFTA negotiators I was talking to earlier today suggested they might not even address one of the thorniest issues for Canada, and that is supply management. The EU free trade deal, this is context, had an agreement in principle in 2013. 4 years later, there was an actual agreement.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. So maybe it's just about political wins then, Andrew? Is that what everyone's setting themselves up for?
Yeah, there's always theatrics, there's always posturing vis-a-vis your negotiating partners, and there's posturing vis-a-vis the rest of the outside world that's watching. But remember, this is a president who's changes his mind, 3 or 4 times a day. You've also got, competing power centers within that White House, more than there usually is, people with very different views on this. You've got Larry Kudlow, for example, the new economic advisor, who is a dyed-in-the-wool free trader. You've got Peter Navarro, who is a dyed-in-the-wool protectionist. So it must cause their negotiating partners to tear their hair out, because you're just not sure exactly who you're dealing with or what their frame of mind is going to be from week to week. And we've seen this with these talks. I mean, again, all negotiations always have fake deadlines and fake drama, but in these ones we've seen total changes in mood and atmosphere from one day to the next. So, and I would not be surprised if we see more. Remember, of course, we've also got the steel tariff thing hanging over us.
I was just going to say, that was what
was it, May 1st
10 minutes ago. Yeah,
exactly.
That's right. And I think that inside the Prime Minister's office, Althea, I do think that they try and read the tea leaves as best they can, but I don't know, do they approach this weekend thinking we are going to get a deal because we just want to lock it down and then at least, head to Peru knowing that there's something to say?
Well, I think that we all need to recognize that the push for this thing to have an announceable next week really seems to come from the Americans.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a scheduled 8th round. The Americans are the ones who said, "Hey, Chrystia Freeland, come down to Washington within a week's notice," and the plans have all changed. And the reason, obviously, that they're having a ministerial meeting at this level is because it's easier to negotiate and trade things. You don't have to write back and what does Ottawa say about this? What does Mexico City say about that? And so there obviously they are working towards something.
Okay, I want to change topics quickly, and this is to do with, again, I guess what we call the Atwell affair in Ottawa. I don't know if the rest of the country has gone onto that yet, but and the Conservatives' admission now that they will sit down with Daniel Jean, the National Security Advisor, and have a briefing. Just to remind people, this is a little bit of what this sounded like about a week and a half ago or so.
The only reason why the Prime Minister is offering me a briefing for classified information in my capacity as a Privy Councillor is to prevent me from asking questions about his disastrous trip in India and the cover-up that he helped orchestrate. All we are asking for is for the same information that has been provided to the media to be provided to the House of Commons.
We have offered to the member opposite to know the truth, but he prefers to play political games.
Okay, Jason, I'm going to start with you. Is he playing political games? Was he? Why has he now agreed to the briefing? Daniel Jean is also going to appear in front of a committee at some point. How are we still talking about this? And what does it do to have Andrew Scheer actually get that briefing that he felt that he wanted?
I'm going to go on a limb here and say that politicians are all playing political games. I think that's going to be a standard truism in almost everything we hear raised in the House of Commons. What the Conservatives want is to keep not just the Atwell affair. I mean, I don't think that's what the public thinks of it. I think they want to keep the whole India embarrassment of the Trudeaus in the public eye. And this is sort of the pointy edge. This is the policy front on this. Does Scheer want context? Perhaps, but not so much as he wants a public airing and a public potentially embarrassment of Daniel Jean here.
Well, and how smart is that then, Althea, to bring a national security advisor out in public and potentially embarrass him? A bureaucrat who may or may not have, maybe it was the right thing to talk to people, maybe it wasn't, but I don't know about the tactics behind that.
I don't think they're going to try to embarrass him. I think what the Conservatives want to sort of have impregnated in people's minds is that the Liberal government is guilty of a cover-up. They don't want Canadians to know the truth. That's why they sent the National Security Advisor out to talk to reporters, in a background discussion, and that they're hiding the truth from Canadians. Now, with Mr. Jean agreeing to give Mr. Scheer a classified briefing and then, or maybe the reverse, and then speaking to a Commons committee in a public forum, he gets to say in that public forum whenever he's asked a question from a Conservative MP, for example, well, I cannot tell you, I can't reveal that information because it's classified, but I will tell your party leader about it. So I'm not sure that anybody comes out a winner out of this situation. I mean, they've both been playing political games and kind of distorting the truth to fit their own agenda, and both sides kind of appeared like children, like, you leak classified information, you don't want to know the truth, over and over and over again for like 2 weeks. Now, I think perhaps the bigger question is, how do you put the toothpaste back in the tube? Should Mr. Jean had given this briefing in the first place, and this entire mess that has erupted because of it?
Andrew, last word to you.
There are substantive and serious issues underneath all the political posturing. First of all, why did Jean give this briefing? Was it of his own free will, and was he intervening in a politically charged situation? That's odd and slightly improper. Or was he put up to it by the PMO, in which case it's even more improper to be involving a career civil servant in that way? Secondly, is what he said true? Are there rogue elements within the Indian government trying to sow bad temper between the government of India and government of Canada? That's a serious charge. If it's not true, then that calls into question Mr. Jean's competence. So that's a serious issue. And thirdly, the issue to me is what kind of evidence? What kind of evidence did he provide? If he did provide classified information to those journalists, that's an issue. If he didn't, then the question becomes, why can't parliamentarians also see the same evidence? So all of those, I think, are perfectly legitimate questions to answer, and they involve, state security, they involve relations with India, they involve the relationships between the civil service and the political staff. These are all legitimate issues for Parliament to be exploring. So underneath the yes, they're all playing political games, I think there are questions that Mr. Jean has to answer and only he can answer.
But can I just add that we do know, or at least we strongly suspect, that Mr. Jean has already spoken to the National Intelligence Committee. This is the super secretive committee with reason, because they deal with top secret information. They have already received a briefing from Mr. Jean. So these answers have already been shared with parliamentarians, but those parliamentarians can't actually confirm or deny whether Mr. Jean spoke to them or what he said.
They're sworn to secrecy the rest of their lives.
Well, and I was going to say, even if Jean has those answers, we're not going to get them. And I think that's the problem with this whole story. Okay, thanks, everybody. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you. Good news if you like politics as much as we all do, clearly. At Issue is also a podcast. You can get extra content and, of course, what we just discussed here in podcast form every week. This week's bonus topic, thanks to Andrew, carbon pricing. It used to be a top choice for Conservatives. Now it's hard to get anyone on board. Can it be successful? What would it take? Find us on iTunes, any major podcast app. Go to cbc.ca/thenational.